Hello there. My name is Paul Campbell, and I'm going to continue to read Message to the Millennials by Brother Rizza Islam. Chapter 3. Who really wants to be conscious? We know that COINTELPRO, or the FBI's counterintelligence program under J. Edgar Hoover, was established in 1956 to disrupt the activities of the Communist Party of the United States. In the 1960s, it was expanded to include a number of other domestic groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, surprisingly, the Socialist Workers' Party, and Black Panther Party. All COINTELPRO operations were ended in 1971, supposedly. Although limited in scope, about 0.2% of the FBI's workload over a 15-year period is what they say. COINTELPRO was later rightfully criticized by Congress and the American people for abridging First Amendment rights and for other reasons. The First Amendment is the freedom of religion, speech, press, petition, and assembly. Some of the targets of COINTELPRO were white hate groups, the New Left Puerto Rican groups, so-called Black extremist groups, Hoodwink, Cuba, the Socialist Workers' Party, espionage programs, and others. Now they say that it ended in 1971 under J. Hoover, and I find it very interesting that they say that there was a such thing as Black extremism. They do not speak of the over 350 years of racially motivated wickedness and evil being dealt upon Black and brown people. They do not speak of slavery primarily being dealt upon Black people, and they do not speak of the economic deprivation primarily dealt upon Black people. They do not speak of the educational castration and the targeted and systemic oppression over hundreds of years. And now we are dealing with the results, including the still very, very blatant racism being dealt to Black people every day within the inner cities of America. So they say COINTELPRO ended, and they say nothing transferred from back then up until today. So you truly want to be conscious, huh? Okay, let us see some of those who were being monitored under COINTELPRO and the FBI with J. Edgar Hoover. Okay, for the Black Panther Party, we have Bobby Seale, Huey P. Newton, Kathleen Cleaver, Angela Davis, and of course Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was murdered at 21. They were monitoring Martin Luther King. They even bugged Martin Luther King's phone and were spying on him heavily. They sent a letter to Martin Luther King telling him that he should kill himself, and if he does not, that they would send a tape to his wife with the recordings of his activities with other women. The FBI counterintelligence program was said to have ended in 1971, and that their tactics were over. However, we see now that in 2017, in the month of August, the FBI released a new form of COINTELPRO, where they have now labeled Black people who no longer choose to accept oppression, racism, and murder of their people unjustly as Black identity extremists, aka BIEs. And the FBI's Counterterrorism Division published their report warning law enforcement across the country of a new so-called threat. In reality, there is no such thing as a Black identity extremist movement. It is a fabricated label used to justify the continuation of brutality and domestic terrorism being brought forth by those who wear a badge and who worked for so-called law enforcement. The publication revealed the existence of the counterterrorism memo Friday and briefly posted the actual document on its website with the FBI before removing it. According to the FBI, it is very likely some BIEs are influenced by a mix of anti-authoritarian, more sovereign citizen ideology and BIE ideology. They are basically saying that anything dealing with integrity, having self-respect, dignity, having a sense of moral pride and love for one's people is wrong, and that standing up to murder and oppression equals aggression towards law enforcement rather than a response to the being occupied by a foreign force. Responding to oppression does not make the responder the oppressor. Responding to oppression makes the responder a responsible human being. The first law of survival is self-preservation. So if a police officer were being aggressed upon or attacked, it is not his obligation to seek the protection of his own life, or does that make him an ideological extremist for wanting to live? This is an interesting area. This is an interesting illogical basis for this description. You cannot murder someone and then question why their family is angry with you. You cannot kill someone and then invoke confusion as to why the community is in outrage for if this same yardstick were being applied by you, you would find the complete and total logic behind your feelings. If someone murdered your mother, your brother, your father, your wife, husband, niece, nephew, son, or daughter, there is no question that you would be unhappy about this. And let's say they just continue to murder your family members one by one. Would it make you an extremist for wanting justice and say they continue to murder your family members one by one, yet you don't attack them, but you raise your voice in disagreement? You march in disagreement, you protest in disagreement, you simply make it known that you do not like nor do you appreciate what it is that they are doing. How is that extreme? Wouldn't you do the same, or would you simply retaliate? Being Black and retaliatory is suicidal. But being Black and accepting of oppression makes us citizens. We cannot be considered citizens and disapprove of whole oppression. At the same time, the report found that it is very likely that the police killing of Ferguson, Missouri teenager, brother Michael Brown, and the subsequent decision by a grand jury not to indict the officer responsible for his death to quote spurred an increase in premeditated, retaliatory, lethal violence against law enforcement and will very likely serve as justification for such violence. Indictment of alleged police abuse against African Americans since then have continued to feed the resurgence in ideologically motivated violent criminal activity within the so-called BIE movement, running 12 pages, including endnotes and citations. The reports included 6 examples of premeditated violence. This is so interesting, and they state that the intent was against police officers by Black people who supposedly were motivated by identity extremism. Now be very mindful that they continue to say identity, identity, identity. They have no problem when we murder one another. They have no problem watching Mexicans kill Mexicans, Italians killing Italians, Chinese killing Chinese, hell, even white people killing white people. But when someone chooses to stand up against police, then they somehow are having an identity circuitry malfunction. Because being Black and embracing self-love is an enemy of your citizenship. You become disqualified to be considered an American when you stand up against systemic oppression. They even outlined that there were 6 attacks in 2014, and the FBI assesses it was very likely that the BIE suspects acted in retaliation for perceived past police brutality. So when we stand up, it is a perception, but when they stand up, it is a reality. Our pain is not real to the system, but their pain is the only real significant, relevant area of concern. And maybe that too is a perception of ours, right? Yeah. It even noted that even though 5 of these attacks occurred following controversial police shootings of African Americans by white police officers, BIE targeting of officers was not in every incident based on their specific race. One individual profiled was Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson, who killed 5 police officers in a rampage in Dallas in July of 2016, firing his first shots during a Black Lives Matter march. Based on what they say, Michael Johnson's journal writings and statements to police, he appeared to have been influenced by so-called BIE ideology. Insanity runs deep in a country full of guilt. The term Black identity extremist doesn't appear to have been used by counterterrorism officials before the FBI's August report. The Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services appears to have been one of the first organizations to employ the new term in a course of description flagged by Foreign Policy for the upcoming training event called Introduction to Domestic Extremism and Hate Groups. Domestic extremist movements covered will include white supremacists, while nationalists, Black identity extremists, anarchists, animal rights, and eco-terrorists, anti-government, and other radical separatist groups. The course description, read by counterterrorism and homeland security experts interviewed by Foreign Policy, expressed skepticism at this new label, as they should. Michael German, a former FBI agent turned Brennan Center fellow, said basically, it's Black people who scare them. Plain and simple. But what I find interesting is that the identity is a major area of focus. So as you research, you will find that in 1969, in the month of January, the FBI came out with a certain part of their document dealing with Black nationalists, supposed hate groups. It says here, under racial intelligence, that the Nation of Islam, they stated, for example, in their surveillance of the NOI, that although the Nation of Islam does not presently advocate violence by its members, the group does preach so-called hatred of the white race and racial separatism. The membership of the NOI is organized and put in as posing a real racial threat. The NOI is responsible for the largest Black nationalist newspaper at that time, called the Muhammad Speaks, but is now called the Final Call, which has been used by other Black so-called extremists. The NOI appears to be the personal fiefdom of Elijah Muhammad. When he dies, a power struggle can be expected, and the NOI could change direction. We should be prepared for this eventually. We should plan how to change the philosophy of the NOI to one of the strictly religious and self-improvement orientation, deleting the so-called racial hatred and separate nationhood aspects. Let us pause here one moment and analyze this. The love for oneself and one's identity is perceived as racial hatred. Why has this in the separate nationhood aspect become an issue? Why is this? When you see that there is a little China in almost every major city in America, when you see that there is a Greek town in almost every major city in America, there is a little Tokyo, little Japan, little Italy, and little Armenia. There is a Jewish district in almost every major city we have. Why do I have to not label them with an identity of separatism and racial hatred when they have their own separate territories within the country? However, when groups such as the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, and others seek to do the same exact thing, they are labeled as hate groups and separatist organizations. Very interesting. It states that in this connection, Chicago should consider that counterintelligence action should be needed, even projecting that at the time of Elijah Muhammad's death, to bring about such a change in the NOI philosophy. Important considerations should include the identity, strengths, and weaknesses of any contenders for NOI leadership. So one of the major focuses that they sought out to change was the identity, the mentality, the mental composition, the frame of mind, and the frame of thinking. They never wanted Black people to have a sense of knowledge, of self and pride in nation building, unity and love for who we truly are. This was written back in 1969, and they stated that back then identity was something that must be changed. Consider this. If they said identity was a major factor back then, and if COINTELPRO ended supposedly in 1971, why is it that it resurfaced now from 2017 forward, and the major premise yet again is the identity? Is it truly over, or has it simply taken on a new form backed by an illogical justification? Who really wants to be conscious? Being conscious does not end well, or they say being conscious does not end with having lots of money and lots of fortune and wealth and happiness and joy and prosperity. This is what people think. Being conscious does not end that way. Well, what is consciousness? What does it really mean? Who has the right to determine who is conscious and who isn't? When does one even become conscious? Well, let's understand consciousness is simply the state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. It is the awareness of perception of something by a person, place, or thing. It is of sound mindedness and understanding what is taking place. Consciousness is even deeper. It's not only the what, but the who. It is who you are. It is who you and I are. In relation to self and kind, as well as self and others. It is the understanding of creation, the understanding of the universe itself, and how we as individuals reflect the universe as the collective. It is not simply awareness to be aware. It is to have the knowledge of a fact or situation or perception. But to be conscious is to be in complete active experience of what one is aware of. This is why in the movie The Matrix, Morpheus, who interestingly represents the Greek god of dreams, entered into the mind of Neo. Neo means new or modern. It means a revived form of something to become conscious, means to step into any evolved, elevated, and or advanced level of where one is and who you truly are. And in a sense, it means to go back to your original state, which was far better than where you are currently. If you truly understand from a spiritual and an energy perspective, Morpheus told Neo that the Matrix is a system and that system is our enemy. When you are inside, what do you see? Teachers, doctors, lawyers, the very minds of the people we are trying to save, and many of them are so hopelessly connected to this system, so stuck and dependent upon the system that even when you would tempt to unplug them or pull them from the system, they will fight to protect it. What does this mean when you evolve into a higher state of mental consciousness, an evolutionary and revolutionary state of mental condition and spiritual condition? You have chosen and have actively gone to war with this world that is constructed and built, manufactured, maintained, and perpetually thriving on lies. You have made yourself go against the enemy, trying to maintain the status quo. You have become a menace, a criminal, and a so called terrorist. Why? Because you threaten the very fabric of this reality, which is not the reality. The system gains life based upon how many minds it can enslave. This is why, as you move into and towards consciousness, you cannot become an information whore. An information whore is one who simply indulges in massive amounts of information just to be around and engorge themselves in information, information, information. It is imperative, vital, necessary, and even a requirement that once you become conscious, that you become a fact checker and practically apply that you now know. People have lots of information, but not too many have facts. There is an overwhelming amount of information in this world, and then there was also an overwhelming amount of facts. But it is up to the person and their individual consciousness to determine whether or not they will make effort, the effort to access and acquire facts versus simply consume information. Understanding is what everyone should seek to attain wisdom, and even more so, higher states of consciousness and awareness via a spiritual, universal understanding. For there are a lot of people who know a lot of things, but understand very little of what they know. And that is why we are partially in the condition that we are in. After we step into consciousness, yes, and we watch all of these videos on YouTube, and all of these videos on Facebook, and all of these videos on Instagram, and all these videos on Twitter, and every other social media site, and even reading articles all over the internet. And then we read books and we listen to lectures and we go to events and have mental building sessions with groups of people around us, such that many who have not been involved in seeking higher levels of consciousness fall into the area of debating versus demonstrating. The so called consciousness community has been the number one community out of all communities within the area of consciousness, specifically not in the area of general religion nor in general politics, seeing how those are the two most controversial topics on the planet. Number one, religion. Number two, politics, but specifically, and melanated consciousness community, debates have become mental. whorehouses, debates have become a show where they first were demonstrations of higher levels of wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and consciousness that inspired the community to seek more knowledge of self. They are now nothing more than cliche. Melanated surfaces, where one group argues with another group over topics that cannot necessarily benefit the plight and the overall agenda of us as a people, where topics that used to be inspiring and even encouraging of one's attention are now nothing more than simply entertainment for the lowest of mental exercises. Consciousness should be demonstrated, not debated. Consciousness should be determined based on the amount of work done and results yielded. Whoever creates the most impactful, tangible things within the community that enhances the livelihood of the majority of the melanated men, women, and children is the most conscious. Yet whoever debates the most and creates the least to actually enhance the lives of those around the community have the least level of consciousness and therefore are nothing more than prostitutes for likes and concubines for comments in one way, shape, or form. Some of those within this so-called consciousness community are even agents of the United States government working on behalf of the so-called anti-terrorism division to prevent BIEs or so-called black identity extremists from rising to power and influence. It truly is a disappointing time and circumstances when we aid our enemy in the destruction of our efforts to come out of the condition with our people. This is COINTELPRO in modern times, and it is absolutely necessary that we see who is actually doing the work rather than who is simply talking. We have a lot of talkers, and not only does the government know this, but those across the world know this. It is no secret that Black people are knowledgeable. It is no secret that melanated people possess the highest level of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, although many across this planet possesses it. Also in Asia, India, South America, down under in Australia, and the islands, and even in parts of Europe, people all across the planet have levels of knowledge, levels of wisdom, levels of understanding, and this must be acknowledged. However, to be Black people who possesses this amount of cataclysmic, enormous, gigantic, monumental knowledge that can universally change our condition, we lack the application. This is something that the world marvels at and wonder because if they had it, they know that they would utilize it to the highest of its capacity, which is why they are in a better condition to a degree because they utilize what it is that they already have. And we too should do the same. Debating will not free us. It never has and it never will. Demonstrating will free us. It has and it will. Building will free us. It has and it will. Producing actual change through positive activity will free us. These are activities that other members of the human family have utilized and they have seen results every time. They have made movements to build and they have witnessed successes. The difference with us, of course, is that when we build, when we decide to act rather than simply talk, there is a system that actively, by default, goes into motion to prevent us from rising, and this is true. However, we have to make the decision to move past fear in order that our freedom may be realized, and truthfully, not all of us will make it. This is true. However, enough of us will if we choose to utilize the knowledge that we have to move forward. It is only through our comfort and beyond our levels of comfort that we will witness the hereafter. But until we move forward, we simply sit around and regurgitate the same information over and over again and argue over individual perception and individual perspectives. While the entire planet is progressing, we will simply maintain and phase out of existence. Al Jazeera came out with something called Surveying Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, being an organization that has well over 1 million members, has the beautiful intention of standing up for what is right for our people, fighting against oppression, fighting against injustice, fighting against wickedness, fighting against systemic white supremacy, and yes, white supremacy as a system. It is a system that affects all members of the human family, and even now the world is witnessing and is seeing that this system of white supremacy is on its deathbed. Hence why there are so many mass shootings happening all across the country and even other parts of the world. It is no secret anymore. It is no longer hidden. It is no longer simply a what if or a figment of Black people's imagination because of a post traumatic slavery syndrome. It is an absolute reality that everyone witnesses, including white people themselves. No one in this country or anywhere else in the world can run away from the fact that this country was built on the same system that is striving and trying its best to survive. So, Black Lives Matter being another group that COINTELPRO, I mean the FBI guys, so called BIE description applies to, is an organization that is heavily monitored along with the Nation of Islam, along with the Moorish Science Temple, currently along with the new Black Panther Party, along with the multiple groups and organizations fighting for freedom, justice, and equality for Black people. What is interesting is that there have been reports and words and rumors circulating that George Soros, the Hungarian philanthropist and multi-billionaire, was one of the funders of Black Lives Matter with a little over $30 million. No, I do not believe that this is the fact. However, what I do find interesting is that George Soros, along with multiple bankers, white bankers, have helped to fund organizations that goes against the authoritarian and tyrannical government that is called the United States of America. George Soros, to be specific, is part Jewish, and when he was a little boy in Germany under the Nazis, was one of those who helped the Nazi soldiers to locate other Jewish families. Okay? He pointed to the homes of Jewish families so that they would later be burned in ovens. Yet now he is a supposed philanthropist. It is simply something to be questioned when philanthropists and white bankers help to sponsor, fund, or help organizations for Black people who are fighting for justice, while at the same time they fund groups and organizations and companies that help to perpetuate injustice. It is simply something to note and to look at. This is why we have to pay very close attention to who we accept help from. Yes, our people must be free. All oppressed people must be free. And for those that missed it, all oppressed people must be free. However, Black people are the number one oppressed and deserve relief from oppression. There is a need for sacrifice, meaning those of us who truly see that a change is needed in a time where the world is going totally insane. In a time where systems of corruption are collapsing all across this planet, where the world is seeking justice, seeking truth, seeking really a God or Allah or Yahweh or the Supreme Being or Jehovah or whatever name for the universal energy that you feel comfortable with, we are seeking to get back to and return to that. And it is necessary, for we are a spiritual people, the most spiritual people. And it is the spirit that we must draw power from, as well as the mind. So consciousness takes sacrifice. Consciousness is not a game. Consciousness is not to be played with. Consciousness is not to be pimped. The original scientists of this world would use their consciousness to build planets, to construct civilizations, to map out the stars, to grab and analyze not one, but multiple galaxies and universes. The original scientists and the original people of this planet utilized higher states of mental vibrational energy to conduct planetary scientific experiments. And I know that may sound funny, but the way we operated back then is far more superior than how we operate today. Today we use our consciousness to get it popping and the DMs on social media to manipulate the emotions of vulnerable women and men. Because there are females who pimp consciousness as well. We use consciousness to involve ourselves in illegal activities to manipulate the psyche of men and women who are entrusting us with their spiritual and mental healing and treatment, and just those who simply want to learn from us. This is not right. Our consciousness is our weapon. It is our arsenal. It is our defense apparatus that we use and utilize to fight against anything that is negatively attempting to influence the masses of our people. So simply be mindful. Then when you decide and say, I want to be conscious, just know you have also decided to take on the responsibility of caring for those in the society who are not mentally or spiritually capable. You have decided to become a caretaker, a savior, a watchman, a spiritual gangster, a factual truth terrorist. And that is the only terrorist you want to be. Repeat, the only terrorist you want to be is a truth terrorist. The one who uses this truth to destroy lies, choosing to stand up for what is right and utilizing integrity to give your word and to give your life before that your word shall fail. To have a sense of honor. This is a serious thing. It's not a game. Well, because we have so much access to information, now we feel that it's easy to hold on to this so-called consciousness simply because we have information. Remember, as you read earlier, you do not want to become an information whore. You want to become a fact checker, meaning one who checks with facts, not opinion. Your opinion or our opinion should be secondary to the facts. How we feel about a thing should be secondary to the facts. Our perspective should be secondary to the facts. And even when you use your opinion, when you use and utilize your perspective, when you choose to invoke your feelings, all those should be validated with and through the facts. We're at the end of the days. Those are what truly matter. The facts have to be razor sharp facts, which is ultimately truth for utilizing the facts that are appropriate with the circumstance. The context and the exact time is a crucial point of being conscious, but what was true 20 minutes ago may not be true right now. What was a fact 30 years ago may not be the fact today. So always remember that consciousness is an ever-evolving condition, ever elevating, ever-growing condition. Remember that, understand that, utilize that, and we absolutely will move forward into a better condition. That much will be inevitable. Makes sense, doesn't it? It's all good. It's all good, and oh yes, there will be slang in this book. So if you are anally grammatical at some point, you will be annoyed. So continue to read on and enjoy the ride. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is chapter 3 of Message to the Millennials.